Hello, everyone. This is Ceylan Canbilek with the German Marshall Fund's Ankara office, and I am delighted to welcome you all to today's discussion. Before the introductory remarks, on behalf of the German Marshall Fund, I would like to extend our warm thank yous to our project sponsor, first of all, to Swedish International Development Agency, shortly SIDA, and also to our project partner, Istanbul Bilgi-University Center for Migration Research. Despite the hurdles brought by the coronavirus, this project, namely Strategies and Tools for Mitigating Polarization in Turkey, kicked off eagerly in September with a Delphi study and the following working group meeting, which helped us as instruments to conceptualize polarization in Turkey. And the next step of the project was the public opinion survey. Today, this is the purpose of our coming together, Dimensions of Polarization in Turkey 2020. The survey was conducted with 4,006 respondents representing Turkey's adult population, and how it was conducted will be elaborated by our speakers, but just to give you a brief idea that the findings presents a clearer picture of polarization in Turkey and how to tackle them. Today, we are here more about the survey findings and discuss the implications for Turkish society and politics. And the future steps of the project will be a gamified tool where the users will be able to assess their own polarizing attitude, and some provincial workshops where local actors will be brought together to raise awareness on polarization. And the final product will be a book reviewing the strategies for mitigating polarization. And we will close with a conference. This is a 2-year project, and we are very eager to be able to assume it, to be able to start it. And among our speakers today, we have 3 speakers. Emre Erdoğan, Professor of International Relations at the Istanbul Bilgi-University. And Emre Erdoğan is also the scientific coordinator of this project. And Nora Fisher, she is an assistant professor of international studies at the University of San Francisco. And Paul Levin, and he is the director of the Institute for Turkish Studies at the Stockholm University. The latter two are very close followers of Turkey. And we believe the success of these webinars lies in being interactive and informal. So what we plan to do is just to give brief timing for the speakers, and also we would like to extend the time to the questions and answers session. So for you to submit your questions, you can use the Q&A function of the Zoom, and you will find it at the bottom of your screen. And please, when you are submitting your questions, state your name and your affiliation. And if possible, please mention to whom you are addressing your question to. And for you to know, this will be an on-the-record conversation, and we have dedicated 90 minutes for this event. So first, I will give the floor to Emre, and Emre will present us the findings of the survey. So floor is yours, Emre, and you have 15 minutes. I know that this is a hard job because there are too many things to explore. Floor is yours.
Thank you, Ceylan. Yes, it's not easy, but I will try to do my best. Yes. I will try to share my screen. Of course, that's the time. First of all, I would like to thank you for this nice opportunity to discuss our findings with that kind of distinguished audience. Yeah, that's the name of the project. This is the 3rd one we conducted with that name. That's why we have a time tag here. Ceylan gave some information about the methodology. And we conducted this survey during November and December in 29 different cities in 500 different sampling points by using face-to-face interviewing techniques. It was very difficult under coronavirus conditions, but we tried to comply these measures, and I believe that we have been successful to conduct. It gives an idea about the profile of participants. It's directly reflects the demographic distribution of Turkey. There is no overrepresentation or underrepresentation. Okay, we can start with some figures about inter-party relations. We are using a kind of socio-psychological approach to the problem, and we ask people, we list all political the name of all political parties, and we ask respondents to state how much do you feel themselves close to each party. Then we ask which one is the closest party supporters. We are not talking about parties, we are talking about supporters. We are underlining it because all these questions following that questions are about individuals, not political parties. And you can see that AK Party supporters comes closest most, about 1/3, the CHU supporters 1/5, MHP supporters 1/10, and all other three parties, they have similar percentages, which is about 10%. And then we ask this question, which political party supporters do you feel most distant? And HDP has a percentage of 40%. AK Party comes second about with a percentage of 22%, and CHP share is 14%. And if you look at the distribution within the parties, you can see that AK Party supporters don't like HDP supporters and CHP supporters. CHP supporters, they don't like AK Party supporters and HDP supporters. HDP supporters, they don't like AK Party supporters and MHP supporters. And MHP supporters, they don't like HDP supporters with 3/4 and they don't like CHP supporters. And about E-Party supporters, they don't like HDP supporters and AK Party supporters. It is clear that HDP supporters, they are not sympathetic for each political party basis, and each political party has a kind of other party supporters. Based on this question, we try to measure the level of affective polarization. Affective polarization is simply the increase emotional distance between different parties' bases, or different between different parties' supporters. And we enlarge this concept by including three different measures. The first one is social distance. It has been developed by Bogardus during 1920s. It measures people's willingness to participate in social contact. The second one is moral superiority. One's position actions are justified by having higher moral values than others, namely other party supporters. And political tolerance, it has been developed during 1950s, but we are using the version of Gibson. It is about how we are accepting to give some rights to other party supporters. All these three measures form our concept of emotional, affective political polarization, and it's a kind of othering which leads to dehumanization of other party supporters, or if you want to use a new concept, political sectarianism in the context of the US. And when we look at the questions about social distance, our findings show that about 3/4 of participants, they don't want their son or daughter marrying a supporter of that political party, the most distant political party supporters. This score is 72% for the case of doing business with a supporter of that political party, and 2/3 allowing kids being friends with their kids, and about 6% of our participants, they don't want them as neighbors. It shows that the majority of Turkish citizens, they don't want a close contact with the supporters of the other political party. That's the first stage of otherization or othering. And we are listing some adjectives such as being patriotic, working for the benefit of the country, honorable, open-minded, smart, and generous. Some of these articles are adjectives are positive, and some of them they are negative. And you can easily see that each party supporter, they are taking positive adjectives for themselves and leaving the negative ones to the other party supporters. It's a kind of moral superiority, and it justifies further behaviors. If you feel yourself morally superior than others, you can give any right to you, including dehumanization and other kind of thing. And political intolerance is very important because, as you can easily see, we are talking about political parties and their supporters, meaning that they have some rights. For example, to organize a rally in the town, organize a meeting, making a press release, etc. These are political rights. And these findings show that about 30 to 40% of our participants, they accept the withdrawal of these rights from that political parties. That's a violation of rights. They say that they are accepting. Yes, you cannot directly see that. We can say that a significant portion of participants say that phone tapping is acceptable for the supporters of other party, which is a violation of human rights. And we also asked some critical questions. Perhaps you are not familiar with these discussions, but they were very important for this summer, except coronavirus discussions. Turning Hagia Sophia into a mosque and opening for worship. Almost 90% of the supporters of AK Party, they are supporting this move. And this support is on 1/3 among the supporters of the CHP. And building the Canal Istanbul, another big project of the government, and 2/3 of the supporters of AK Party, they are supporting it, and this score is only 10%. And another important issue we are discussing in our everyday lives, giving the right to have an education in their mother tongue for children who have another mother tongue than Turkish. This is 90% for HDP supporters, Kurdish political party, and it's only 20%. This figure shows that there is a huge issue-based polarization among the supporters of different political parties. And we also list some other discussions in our political agenda. For example, the revenue guarantees given to companies that build bridges and highways, dismissal of some mayors and appointment of trustees, etc. These are important issues for Turkish public opinion. For example, election of Ekrem İmamoğlu, the mayor of Istanbul, etc. And we gave a list of positive and negative emotions. And we asked respondents, what kind of emotions do you have when we are discussing this issue? And we calculated a kind of index showing that the percentage of negative feelings. And you can see that the first item, which is very important in today's discussions, created a huge negative feeling in the opposition supporters, CHP party and HDP. And this negative feeling is not very high in the government supporters. The second one, dismissal of mayors and appointment of trustees to replace them, which it became very popular after the famous speech of the Minister of Interior during the budget discussions. 90% of HDP supporters, they have negative feelings about that topic. And this is 80% for CHP supporters. And only 20% of MHP voters, they have negative feelings. If you analyze this table, you can see that in almost every issue, we have a kind of emotional gap, except the discovery of natural gas in the Black Sea. And it seems that no one has a negative feeling. It's a kind of convergence among the electorate. I believe that. Then we moved to the reasons of this polarization. There are too many reasons. Some of them they are structural, some of them institutional, some of them conjectural, but we focused on the media side. And we introduced two different concepts. The first one is echo chambers. It has been developed by guest sensing, and the communication environment where individuals can only hear their own opinions. We discussed this concept in our previous book in details. And the spiral of silence, it has been developed by a very famous German social scientist, Neil German, in 1974. And the argument says that individuals thinking that their opinions are in the minority and they remain silent. It creates a kind of spiral, and no one wants to argue about their opinions. And then we picked a very sensitive question. We could pick many other sensitive questions, but we picked that one to be on the safe side, and we asked people whether they would like to discuss this issue in different settings. The first one was a family dinner. 50% of them, they said they would join. And a dinner outside with friends, 50% of them said, yes, they will join. A neighborhood meeting, about 40%. at the workplace or school, 30%. Facebook and Twitter, only 20% of participants say that they can join to such a discussion. And we didn't ask people's opinions about this issue. We asked whether would you like to join to the discussion or not. And it shows that people, they don't want to participate that kind of sensitive, quote unquote, discussions, even in their family dinners. They are hesitant to discuss. And we ask another question, independent of your opinion. What kind of consensus do you have in your house? For example, 80% of participants say that their spouse, girlfriends or boyfriends, they have similar views about that topic. And about when we are talking about close friends, the score was same, 8%, and about the family, 8%. Let me repeat. Although the percentage of respondents who said their families, they have similar opinions with them about that topic is 80%, the half of the population, they want to participate to discussions, even though you know that everyone agrees with you, almost everyone agrees with you, but you don't want to discuss. That's the spirit of science, and that's the conclusion. And we ask people to state their TV preferences for getting political opinions. Of course, it may be very complicated for the audience who is not familiar with Turkish media landscape, but okay, for AK Party supporters, Kanal 7, A Haber and ATV and TRT, that's the state television, they are the most preferred TV channels to get political news. And for the opposition, Halk TV, People's TV, in terms of, and you can say that it is connected to CHP, which is People's Republican Party, yes. And Fox TV, not similar to American Fox TV, it's different. And they are preferred by HTP and CHP by the opposition parties. And you can say that information channels, they are dispersed across the electorate, and all these other channels, they are located at the center, they are mainstream channels, okay? And you can see that information channels, they are also polarized, but not only polarized, we ask people to evaluate the unbiasedness, impartiality of information sources. And you can see that supporters of the AK Party and MHP, they think that A Haber, TRT1, Sabah, another newspaper, which is under the control of the government, and Hürriyet, which is not under the control of the government. They are the supporters of the government and MHP, they say that, okay, they are impartial. And on the other wing, and HTP supporters think that Fox TV and Halk TV, they are relatively impartial. And for CHP voters, Sözcü and Cumhuriyet, two opposition newspapers, they are impartial. You can see that people, they don't agree on the impartiality of the information resources, news resources. It has too many important consequences. We ask people, I want to show some polarized issue. We ask people, what do you think about the elections? Are they fair, free and fair? And you can see that there is a huge division, 50% of 48% to 44%. And you can see there is a huge differences between different party supporters. For example, 77% of the AK Party supporters think that elections are free and fair. This score is 60% for MHP supporters, but 80% of CHP voters think that elections, they are not free and fair. 90% of HDP supporters, Kurdish political party, they don't agree with that proposition, and the score is 70%. It seems that there's a huge discussion about the rules of the game. They don't, and it's a prerequisite of a good democracy, having a consensus on the quality, at least quality of the game. And we list some institutions, which one do have confidence? Of course, the army comes first. The majority, about more than 70% of parties say that they have confidence in the army. And you can see there is a gap there, and 88% of AK Party voters, they have confidence in the army, and the score is only 40% for HDP. supporters. And for each political institutions and non-political institutions, you can observe some gap between different political parties bases, except Turkish Medical Association, which is a kind of professional association, and World Health Organization, which is funny because they were not popular at all. When we are focusing on the presence of republic, government, parliament, and courts, you can see that there is a very big difference between AK Party supporters and the supporters of the other political parties. And the red ball shows that MHP is located between these two poles, and it is close to AK Party bases. And of course, we have some islands of agreement. For example, we ask people which country is the most important partner of Turkey, and you can see that 50% of respondents say that Azerbaijan is the most important partner of Turkey. And it is not surprising because we conducted the survey during the Karabakh conflict. That's why there may be some agreement. Only HDP voters, this ratio is 26%, but other parties, they present some agreement. Second, Russia is the most important partner of Turkey, and there is that agreement ratio, percentages change between 10% and 10%. There is no huge variation, and there is a variation in the case of Qatar. 7% of AK Party supporters think that Qatar is the most important partner of Turkey, but a Turkish classic, and 8% of participants say that Turkey has no friends. It's not surprising. It's a Turkish tradition, and this score is 13%. And I want to present another important island of agreement. And when we ask which country forms the biggest threat to Turkey, United States with 48%. About half of the respondents say that United States forms the biggest threat to Turkey. And I want to show these two figures. We have more than 70 slides, and we don't have such a figure. 50% of AK Party voters and 50% of CHP voters, they think that the US is the biggest threat to Turkey. We don't have such another agreement on this research, and there is a small variation between other parties and MHP, and for HDP supporters, this is only 40%. And there's a little variation when we focus on other countries. Israel comes second, Russia comes third, Greece, etc. These are all false, and you can see that there's an agreement there. And we have another island of agreement. This graph shows that if a referendum will be held for full membership to the EU, of course, we'll get a yes, a qualified yes, but the majority of the CHP voters and HDP voters, they vote for yes, and the same for a small majority in the case of E-Party. MHP supporters, they say they will vote against. But we have a classical battery of questions. We are asking this question since 2003. We have 6 different questions about the relations between the West and Turkey. For example, Europe has assisted separationist organizations like PKK to get strong in Turkey. Just like they did in the past to the Ottoman Empire, the European countries want to dissolve and integrate Turkey now. It's a kind of battery. It shows the save syndrome in Turkey, which is a very famous concept. And as I said, we are conducting we are asking that kind of question since 2003, and it always been safe. It always be greater than 60%. And these figures show that, okay, 80% of Turkish citizens agree with that proposition. Europe has assisted separationist organization. This is a safe syndrome, and when we calculate an index of safe syndrome, which changes between 1 and 4, a simple index, which has a high level of reliability, the average is about 3.25, which is more than 3 and close to 4. And this score is 3.45 and 3.46 for AK Party and MHP. It's very close to 4, which is the highest score. And only HDP supporters, they have an average of 2.8, which is not very far from 4, and it's relatively small. And it shows another kind of agreement in the Turkish electorate. We are not presenting here, we are planning to conduct another meeting for it, but we also observe this consensus in the case of Syrian refugees. The majority, almost 80% of Turkish citizens, they don't want Syrians in Turkey, and they want to send them to their own country after the end of the civil war. I hope I didn't violate my time. This is the end. Thank you.
Thank you, Emre. Just perfect. And also maybe it should be noted that the findings were just launched in the morning, so they are very, very fresh for everyone. And also I wanted to wait until Emre's presentation to be over to share the findings, because they are available on the project's website. And now I will just copy the address to the chat screen. And also let me remind you that you can start submitting your questions. I see several questions already in the Q&A screen, and we will gather them and direct them to you after the speaker remarks. And Nora, now we will be happy to hear your comments on the findings and also your thoughts on domestic politics and also foreign policy implications. And we also know that you have an upcoming book, which is on a similar topic on the shifting cleavages and alliances in Turkey. So we are sure that you will be presenting us very fresh ideas. Floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Ceylan, and to everyone involved in this study. It's a really remarkably rich research, and I was particularly appreciative of the methodological rigor. You've managed to combine a large quantitative sample with face-to-face interviews for that sort of qualitative nuance, which is really important in survey work these days. We saw the lack of ability to do that in many of the surveys in the United States leading up to the presidential elections that really flawed survey outcomes. So I applaud you on this this very robust work. And I was struck when I was going through the 70-some slides and all the richness by a comment or an observation that was made almost, I think actually well over 100 years ago by the French sociologist Ernst Renan, who asked the question that remains, very salient for all of us around the world today who are living in countries where there is intense polarization. And that question is, what is a nation? What makes a nation? And this is a question to which peoples around the world continue to seek answers. And Renan's answer to it was quite disheartening when we read it through the prism of these survey results, because his answer was that a nation is a group of people who choose to remember and to forget the same things. And one thing that really comes across from the study is that people have very differentiated memories of what is important, of what the sources of conflict are in the society, and they have very different aspirations as well in terms of the future of the society. So in this sense, the daily referendum that Renan talked about seems to be held in Turkey on a daily basis in a very fractured way. That said, there were quite a few interesting points of consensus, and so that's what I want to talk about today, kind of point out some of the items that seem to jump out as sites where governance could kind of be pursued in a more consensual way. And also noting some of the more worrisome elements of disagreement, drawing out a sort of a comparative lesson for the US at the end, and also a question for the researchers at the end. So in terms of areas of consensus, one thing that is really striking is that when I look at the study and the fact that over 90% of the participants were urban-based, Turkey is a highly urbanized country now. That was something that was, very jumps out at me as different from the US map, where you had really strong bifurcation between rural voters and urban voters in terms of their preferences. But here, almost everybody's urban. And so there's some consensus around what to do, what we need to do in those shared urban spaces together. And clearly, the economy is the priority. Turkey. Unemployment and inflation are priorities. And these are issues which can be politicized, which can be polarized, but which don't have to be. You can pursue sort of technocratic good governance in these arenas, and really generate sort of a response from the society that is likely to be positive across party lines. So I think that's a lesson for the government to take away. In terms of also another thing that was quite heartening for me in an interesting way was the amount of consensus there was, and this wasn't in the slides that Professor Erdoğan showed, but if you visit the website and engage the report, you'll see that there was very strong consensus across party lines that violence against women is a major problem in Turkey. And so this is another area where it's clear that the country should remain a signatory to the Istanbul Convention. It's clear that there's support, including from opposition parties, for the government to take more action on this front. So this is kind of a win-win issue for everyone in the country, and I would encourage Turkey's leadership to be mindful of this. There also seemed to be consensus on education, although I wasn't entirely certain with the way that question was phrased, whether it was sort of education in general or education regarding mother tongue, which are kind of two differentiated issues. So perhaps that's something that Professor Erdoğan could clarify in his responses, because in general, again, investment in education can be polarized, but it can also be a nonpartisan, across the board effort that can help kind of elevate and heal the country more broadly. So that's there, depending on what exactly the nuances of the question involving education entailed, that seems like it would be an area for consensual governance. In terms of an arena where there's clearly a lot of consensus, but this disheartening for me as a friend and a big fan of Turkey in the West, was that very striking statistic about the amount of negativity towards the United States in particular, but also the European Union. The SEV related perceptions of foreign interference, and yet it was also striking to see that despite that negativity towards especially the US, but also the EU, there was also cross-cutting willingness to join the European Union should the opportunity arise. So that leads me to interpret that that data a little bit is kind of a relational and reactive type of relationship. There's a perception that Turkey's been wronged by the EU and the US on differentiated occasions dating back to certainly we see these anti-American numbers dating back to the American mobilized invasion of Iraq, and so this goes back before the current administration, and it's a give and take. There's been a lot of trust lost, but it certainly seemed to me that if there's still that much willingness to join the EU and become a part of a Western bloc, despite these very negative perceptions, then there may be some wiggle room there for some more constructive diplomacy, and it's really also up to in the case of the United States, up to the American leadership to make it clear that their friendship for Turkey is to be relied upon. In terms of how much time do I have left? Maybe 2 minutes or so, I think.
3. Yes, 3.
3. Okay, yes, I can do it. So one particular item that also struck me in terms of the comparative dimension with the United States was, there are aspects where Turks get along better and see each other eye to eye more than we do here in the United States. And one particular dimension of that was the coronavirus management. That was really striking. There was overwhelming consensus on the mitigation measures that have been taken. I wonder when the survey was taken, if this was before or after the discrepant statistics that emerged with a few weeks ago, I believe, vis-a-vis the daily number of cases. But clearly, leadership makes a difference. If a leader decides to polarize pandemic management, as they did, as President Trump did in the United States, you create huge discrepancies in public reception of mitigation measures. Whereas if the government is a little bit more even-keeled in terms of its framing, then there's a possibility for more consensus across the society. Most worrisome point was without a doubt the perception that not only do you not want to share space and conversations with people you don't agree with, but that a good number of people across political parties in Turkey believe that the political and social rights of opposition parties should be curtailed. That is by far the most worrisome, I think, outcome from the survey and finding, and that it suggests that that the processes which Professor Erdoğan mentioned, the possibility of dehumanization, the attenuation of empathy, this can lead to real social violence, and requires very responsible governance on the part of the authorities to prevent such violence. Especially when you look at the HDP figures, the level of alienation is off the charts compared to the other parties, right? That even seems to be translating into emigration and a desire to leave the country. That's also in the statistics in there. So just to conclude, what else did I have in here? To conclude, I think what we do see in these results, and also in the sort of the longitudinal dimension, in the sense that there were several other studies conducted with similar questions in 2017 and 2015, what we do see is that polarization is rising, and polarization is not an entirely unhealthy thing. It can, generate civic participation. It can generate literacy about political issues. It can generate a wider menu of policy options. So polarization is not entirely and always bad, but at these levels, especially when it comes to dehumanizing the other, it's extremely worrisome, and it's counterproductive even for governments and political parties who are seeking to polarize to generate support for their own partisan positions. It's counterproductive because it makes it very difficult to govern, and then you have and you have issues like natural disasters and pandemics and economic governance, which require more buy-in from the society. So it's in everybody's interest to tone the polarization down. That's my 2 bits.
Thank you so much, Nora, especially for sharing your takeaways and recommendations, as one of our intentions with the project is to identify constructive tools to mitigate polarization. And Paul, over to you. And we will appreciate if you can include your insights what this all means for Turkey's further integration to Europe. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll try to do that. Thank you, Ceylan and Özgür, for inviting us, and for GMF and the Istanbul Bilgi-University also, and for the Swedish Development Agency for their support. This was a really, really fascinating study that sort of continues and corroborates some of the earlier existing research on polarization and shed some new lights, and only got the figures earlier today, so I've had a chance to look at them, but I also sort of prepared remarks a little bit more generally about reflections on polarization in Turkey. And I'm going to focus a little bit on the foreign policy dimension, because it's a little bit unclear to me exactly what this means for Turkey's relations with the rest of the world. Polarization, of course, is not a new phenomenon in Turkey. You can even go back to the Ottoman Empire. You know, Sherif Mardin's center periphery model thesis, which had its roots in the reforms of an Ottoman sort of elite and the resistance against these reform attempts by local notables in the peripheries of the empire. And it's something that we've seen throughout the Turkish Republic, but it is also undoubtedly a phenomenon that has grown more acute in recent years, as this report and other research on the topic shows. And I've looked at particularly Turkey-EU relations, and the EU is not without blame when it comes to the developments that we see in Turkey, and I'll be happy to discuss more of that in the Q&A. But for example, the partial freezing of EU accession negotiations in December 2006 could be seen as sort of one incentive for moderation that was removed from on the part of the EU. Vis-a-vis the ruling party, the AKP. Sort of conventionally, you could talk about maybe 4 broad conflict lines or cleavages in Turkish society and politics. The sort of secular religious cleavage, that also Turks themselves, if you look, for example, the Kader Has survey, identify as core. This kind of ties in with this center-periphery thesis in cleavage, if you will. And then, especially in the 1970s, you have a left-right cleavage, which resulted in street fighting and conflict. You also have a often more dormant, but sometimes a conflict line that erupts between Alevis and Sunnis, a sectarian sort of division in Turkish society as well, of course. And fourth, and not finally, you have the Kurdish-Turkish divide that is underlying much. And I'm going to speak more about the first three at first. And I would say that the Alevi Turk and the left-right divisions have, in many respects, kind of been flattened. So if you had divisions that used to be like this, they kind of have aligned. And much of that has to do with the polarizing figure that Erdoğan himself makes out. And this is not typical for Turkey. If you look at polarization in other societies, when you have kind of a strong political leader, then it's quite common, and you have increasing polarization. But that's quite a common feature. So one could talk about one broad sort of pro and con Erdoğan division, if you will, rather than these three conflict lines. So what does this mean if I leave the Kurdish issue to the side for the moment? Well, what does this mean then for foreign relations? It has direct and it has indirect, I think, consequences for foreign relations. As for direct effects, the rather deliberate, I would argue, stoking of anti-Western sentiments. And we saw some of the effects of that in the questions about the Sevres syndrome, as Emre titled it. But these sentiments and the stoking of nationalism, they generate, I would argue, as Nora has pointed out also, as much support for the ruling coalition, as they also generate conflict, right, in relations with the United States and the EU. So there are obvious and quite direct consequences for such polarization that involves the West. But then it also has indirect foreign policy effects. Polarization arguably also also de-democratization. That's also not something that is unique to Turkey as well. Murat Somer, for example, and others have shown how polarization can be bad for democracy in many different ways. It reduces the level of trust, as we have seen in this poll. It reduces voter mobility and sort of this issue-based politics and turns them into identity-based politics. It becomes very easy for you to vote for the opposing party if they have been demonized very seriously. There's economic polarization and politicization of distribution of resources, and relations between different groups become perceived as zero-sum relations. And all of this is bad for the need in a democracy for parties to be able to compromise and negotiate, right? So there are many different ways, as well as a natural rising intolerance that Emre also talked about. The problem for Turkey and the EU is that democratization and democratic reforms are at the core of Turkey-EU relations, right? Still the formal framework for Turkey-EU relations is still EU accession, even though it's de facto dead. But that means that the lack of reform, dramatic backsliding Turkey has created a sort of an impossible strain on Turkey-EU relations. It also creates challenges that this may be less obvious. It creates problems for track 2 diplomacy, something that's very important to the EU-Turkey interactions, and also for a country like Sweden, for example, which has a lot of bilateral support for Turkey. So essentially, you have two civil societies in Turkey. You have one pro-government civil society, and you have sort of NGOs that are independent, often sort of rights-based. And as a foreign actor, who do you work with, right? If you work with charities and foundations with close ties to I'm gonna have to try to turn my alarm off because I'm out of time. How much time can I have, Ceylan? 1 more minute or?
1 more minute, yes.
1 more minute, thank you. With this deep divide, if you work with charities or foundations that have close ties to the government, you're working with essentially government-organized NGOs, right? Gongos, not true NGOs. And they may not truly represent civil society. There may be a greater risk that funding gets into the wrong hands. But if you only work with the rights-based independent NGOs, on the other hand, you sort of perpetuate the narrative that foreign powers are only working to undermine the sitting government. So it's a really conundrum for a lot of international actors, especially the EU. And let me just conclude then by bringing up the Turkish-Kurdish issue. And the report very clearly shows that this is a major issue. And it's also a cleavage that only partly aligns with the other main cleavages, right? Apart from what Nora pointed out, where HDP supporters feel marginalized and discriminated against, which I think is important, it's kind of useful for the ruling coalition, because as long as the Kurdish issue remains an issue that mobilizes people, as long as it remains securitized, then it becomes very difficult, of course, for the opposition parties to collaborate with each other, E-Party and HDP, for example. So with respect to foreign policy, obviously the conflict with the PKK and unresolved Kurdish problems causes very serious problems in relations with the US and the EU over the status of US support to the PYD in Syria, and with the European Union over the EU's concerns over human rights, what they see as human rights violations and the treatment of the HDP. So that's, I think, a major issue that remains to be resolved. And if Turkey is not able to overcome that particular issue, it's going to be difficult to move forward. I have more notes, but I think I'll save them for the Q&A.
Thank you so much, Paul. And thank you very much for the historical depiction and also for the foreign policy aspect. So now I will move to the question and answer session, because we have plenty of questions. And I will start with the first one, and it's addressed to Emre. It's from Doruk Engin. What are the differences and similarities between today's polarization and CHP Democratic Party polarization in the late 1950s? Actually, Paul just mentioned about the historical cleavages, but Emre, it will be great if you can add a couple of more comments.
Thank you for reminding us these old cleavages. Yes, we have too many cleavages, at least 4. And what is new? That's the question. Is there something new in that kind of polarization? Yes, we have too many novelties. The first, we have social media. We didn't have social media during 1950s. It echoes and it multiplies and facilitates political polarization. Secondly, we have partisan media. For 1950s, okay, we had also partisan media, but for many years, Turkey had a kind of polarized media system. But now we have a partisan media, and a significant portion of the media is under control of the government or its allies. And we have a presidential system now. And as Nora said, we are also holding everyday referenda by discussing all these moral issues such as abortion, such as ISOF, etc. And this system is referendum-based. And that's why it divides the society. The parliamentary systems, they are very different than presidential systems. We know it from earlier writings of Paul, Linz, and other colleagues, but presidential system, it divides. We know it divides and polarizes because it creates continuous losers from the party system or political system. And we have 4 million Syrians here now. We didn't have during 1950s. It's something new. And we have coronavirus in it, and it's something creating a common base for us. It's not so polarized. We didn't present here, but that's why I personally believe that there are too many factors which make today's zeitgeist very different than the old discussions of 1950s. And unfortunately, we didn't have polls during 1950s. That's why I cannot compare. I hope I have been successful to answer this question.
Thank you, Emre. Actually, there are 2 more questions on the historical aspect and also the role of media. So I will read them, and then maybe Nora and Paul can chime in as well. The one from Ahmet Bey is the one, it follows as, considering that this research is being conducted over years with similar questions asked for a couple of times, how can you interpret the overall polarization level of Turkey? Is it gradually increasing? And if so, what do you think are the main reasons for that? And the second one is, why different political party supporters feel distant from the other parties? Is it only because of parties' placement in the politics? What about effects of media? Do they expose different news sources? Do they involve in different social discussion network? Nora, can you maybe pick them first?
There we go. Right, and I think, I mean, the answer to these questions also can build on what Emre shared with us just now in terms of the historical differences. You know, this social media dimension is really crucial. It's crucial to the democratic backsliding as a result of polarization in the United States, in the UK, in Brazil. You know, wherever you look, where there's populist leaders, this rise of populism and this rise of populist polarization, you know, really coincides with its with the dissemination of social media as a platform for information sharing, and it really kind of decouples the preferences and perceptions of voters from any sort of objective T. You know, there is no objective T with a capital T, but still, at least, you know, kind of fact-based, science-based, math-based kind of reporting becomes very fuzzy in that social media space. So there's a direct correlation between this new media environment and the types of polarization, the new types of polarization that we're seeing. And it's a real challenge for democratic institutions the world over. Democratic institutions were, you know, conceived of and operationalized literally hundreds of years ago. And, you know, it's been, they have mechanisms to evolve and adapt, but they are not really adapted right now for this dissonance between the post-truth information space and the democratic institutional space. And another gap in this kind of indirectly addresses both questions and builds on, again, on Professor Erdoğan's remarks. Another gap that we see, I think, that's really curious in Turkey, and it's a site for, I think, where a lot of research could be generated, is because we have a political culture and a political tradition of multi-party politics, right, in Turkey. So people are kind of used to being able to maintain their perspective and their niche of society and articulate it through their vote and see their, you know, hopefully see their party represented in parliament. But now the role of the parliament is so significantly overshadowed by the role of the president that it can lead to a lot of frustration, because people continue to vote and act as if it's a parliamentary system, but in fact, you know, governance and decision making is taking place much more at the presidential level. And indeed, presidential systems, as we see in the United States, you know, really lead to much more bipartisan, polarized blocks. And so there's, you know, kind of two spaces of kind of, you know, uncertainty, change, tumult, rupture in the social media space and in this discrepancy between a parliamentary political culture where political parties channel the voices and preferences of voters and the existing presidential system that can lead to a lot of dissatisfaction and a lot of bitterness. And I think that is going to be one of the main challenges looking forward, is to kind of, and not just for Turkey, for all, you know, certainly in the United States with a polarized presidential system that's very much informed by a post-truth media environment, it's our greatest challenge looking forward.
Thank you, Nora. Paul, would you like to add some more comments?
Yeah, that was great, but I'm kind of like stuck on the question, which is deceptively simple, of why do people feel so sort of emotionally and socially distant? I mean, exactly why? It's easy to talk about it. I would venture, just off the top of my sort of head, maybe a couple of explanations for them. One of them has to do with what Nora brought up, namely this emergent populism. Populism has to do with, and the populist rhetoric. Populism is sort of well, it's an ideology or a tactic or what have you. There's disagreements exactly what it is, but it's some kind of thin ideology or movement tactic that divides between the elites and the rest, right? And you have an elite that is an other that really doesn't understand the real people, and you have a populist leader who stands up for the people. And very important to all populist rhetoric is the othering of the others, your opponents, the political opponents. So what we've seen, not just in Turkey, but very much in Turkey, is extremely divisive rhetoric, right? And the rhetoric kind of goes some ways to explain why it's so difficult why the emotional distance between groups and peoples is so large. Because all of a sudden, it's not just about issue disagreements. It's not just about, the other political party, they may have another tax, structure or proposition than you do. It's about who they are. It's about identity. They are terrorists, or they're supporters of a dictator, or they are looters, çapulcular, or what have you. If it's about who they are, then you can't really collaborate with them, right? Even if you may disagree with your particular leader. And then it's the second point, which is related, is that it has to do with fundamental human social psychology, right? Social psychologists have pointed out that we're very good at forming groups and in opposition to other groups. And we tend to form groups, very tight groups, by defining them against others. And social identity theory especially, they've shown that we can form those groups on the basis of almost completely arbitrary characteristics. Right? You can invent characteristics if you're good enough at manipulating a crowd that others certain groups, and you can take just one concept from social psychology called the fundamental attribution error. It's a thick mouthful, but it's the basic human tendency to assume that other people or other groups do things because of who they are, whereas I do things because of the circumstances. So it becomes very easy to blame other people because they're bad people, whereas you can excuse your own mistakes or flaws by the fact that you're forced by circumstances. And then finally, just let me add one more, and that is the fact that there's also a high degree of spatial segregation in Turkey, right? The Kurdish minority lives predominantly in the southeast, even though Istanbul may be the largest Kurdish city, if you will. There's some degree of spatial segregation. The pro-CHP people tend to live, stronger support for CHP on the west coast and in some of the bigger cities, whereas central Anatolia is more AKP, and you have maybe MHP support towards the Black Sea. I'm simplifying significantly, but there is this spatial degree of segregation that also helps. And then segregation and polarization becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you have less contact with the members of the other group, it becomes more easy to stereotype them. Great question.
Thank you. So we have a series of questions on the theory and domestic politics, and I will just read them one by one to Emre, and then I will continue with the questions on the foreign policy, and then I will give the floor to Paul and Nora next. So Emre, first one. Can we say that polarization between HDP voter and CHP voter has decreased? Could this decrease be a return to the founding union of the Republic against the MHP and AKP unity?
Yes, we can say, but I don't think that it's related with this kind of old alliance. But I believe that we need to think about the quote-unquote victory of the opposition in Istanbul and elsewhere with the support of the Kurdish political movement. And without their support, these victories, quote-unquote, were not possible. That's why that first these two camps observed a kind of possibility for cooperation, and it creates a possibility for further cooperation. That's why I can answer in that way. And
sorry. Yeah. Next one. When looking at the data, which theory is the best to explain this kind of polarization? Center, periphery, Kulturkampf, homophily, partisanship?
yeah, all of them are sectarian politics, as some American political scientists forwarded in the nature during last month. Yeah, then we need to accept that, as Paul introduced, there is a huge psychological dimension here. We need to understand this psychological or social psychological perspective. It is not only about not agreeing or disagreeing, it's about dislike or not accepting that as human beings is something more important than simple disagreements about political issues. I believe that perhaps in the new theory, of course, central periphery matters, cultural conf matters, and other theories also matter, but I believe that we need to find a new theory which includes that kind of human and psychological dimension, and in addition to the importance of the media. I believe that we need to find a new theory.
Yes, please, Nora.
Thank you. Sorry to interrupt. Just I wanted to jump in with a follow-up question to that, to Professor Erdoğan, because I was really struck by one of the slides, and this is related to what Paul was also saying about social identity theory in your comments just now. It was fascinating to me that in one of the slides, in terms of self-identification of participants, the self-identification along sort of traditional, Kemalist, sort of Islamist, religious lines, it was all fairly low, and there was other signifiers that were also important. And I wondered if you could, at some point in this discussion, you could perhaps share that slide and comment. It was fascinating. The people, very strong number of people who identified as, or almost as many people who identified as modernist, or I can't remember exactly the other categories, but there were categories that were kind of outside of this usual sort of center periphery Kulturkampf kind of debate. And there was only, I think, 70% identified as Kemalist, 10% as Kurdish, and then all of the other numbers were, below 10% more or less, if I recall correctly. So I would be fascinated if you could explore that slide in light of these kind of alternative theories about what's causing the polarization. Just wanted to jump in with that.
Yes. May I answer, Ceylan?
Yes,
Nora's
please.
question? Yeah, okay. Yeah, thank you for attracting attention to this question about identities. Our major hypothesis is that the Turkish political landscape is dominated by identities which are in junction with political parties. This question is somewhat technical. First, we are asking each respondent a list of different identities, including my family and my neighborhood, etc. And we are how frequently do you use us when you are talking about these people. Then at the second question, we are picking up the highest frequently said, and we ask which one is most important. That's why the second slide is different than the first slide. Yeah, it's a two-stage question because in fact, as Paul may confirm me, people have different identities, and some of them, they are becoming self-aligned. And this issue is related to the zeitgeist of the time. Sometimes, for example, I'm a father, I'm a supporter of Galatasaray, I'm a professor, I'm a student, I'm a friend, etc., etc. I have too many identities, and some of them, they are becoming self-aligned, and some of them, they are disappearing. But the most important thing is that this issue comes from top to down. The political environment of the country tells us which identity is more relevant for us. That's why how politicians talk about politics, how media frames the issue, how etc., etc., how we are interpreting what's happening in our everyday lives, define all this identity construction issue. We are picking one. Indeed, in Turkey, we have three vectors of identities. The first one is being secular or not. It is correlated with being Kemalist, being modernist, etc. The second one is being religious or not. And the third one is being Kurdish or not. We have three vectors. It is possible to derive statistically by using different techniques. And we are located, each of us, we are located in this three-dimensional space, okay?
Emre, I'm sorry, what was the first one? I missed the first
being
one.
Being secular or not. The second one being conservative or not. and the third one being Kurdish or not. They are not orthogonal technically. They are related with each other, but the issue is that all of us, we are located there. The issue is that you are right, yeah, the all rhetoric of politicians is talking about us versus them, etc., etc. But who is this us? That's the issue. Politicians finger some others, some people as the scapegoats of what's happening, and we are positioning ourselves against these people. That's the logic of the populist or polarizing rhetoric. You are picking a group of people, especially, for example, in the case of Turkey, supporters of a political party. It's easy because you can use this supporting a political party as a shortcut to describe a certain people, which is a stereotype. It's clear. You can easily pick a political party supporters and say he's or she's the responsible of all what's happening. It creates the us versus them distinction, and it creates that kind of alienation and polarization. This is my personal opinion. This is what data shows. If I'm not, I answered the question. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Emre. I want to be respectful of our time. So we have 4 or 5 questions on the domestic side. So I will just read them all and then give 2-3 minutes to each of our speakers so that they can provide their own comments on each of them. First off, 2 of them are on the rural and urban cleavages. First one, how much different could be the results of the survey if the percentage of rural respondents was much higher? And the second one, I am curious whether the results for the social distance measures vary by geographic area, districts, provinces. In areas where AKP and CHP received more even shares of votes, is there less social distance than in areas where one party dominated the votes? Next one's on economic inequality and low income. What are the key distinctions between those low-income voters who support the AKP and those who support the opposition parties? And the next one, in what ways does polarization track with economic inequality and disparity? And last but not least, Murat Somer has 2 questions blended with some comments. I will just read them out. Citizens seem to have been polarized among themselves, but also they seem to have been sorted into political party-associated positions. Any evidence whether this is more a top-down versus bottom-up process, whether it resulted from party politics rather than the other way around? How much playing room do political parties have in changing their positions? And the second one, his second question, is there any evidence about an emerging democracy-autocracy cleavage? Some polarized positions are merely associated with parties. In others, one is clearly based on post-truth assumptions. For example, beliefs about the free and fair nature of the elections. So, Paul, maybe you can start and then we will continue with Nora and Emre. Maybe if you can... 2 minutes or 3 minutes.
Oh, I don't know. I don't think I can fill that because I felt like most of these questions were, I think Emre would be better placed at answering, especially the questions regarding the survey. Both Emre and now Murat Somer touched upon this. And of course, Murat would also be well put to answer his own questions, I'm sure. I was thinking about that when we were discussing the question of, what are the causes? What theories best explain this? To a significant extent, not exclusively, but this has been you also have a situation in Turkey where a political party and a dominant political actor has deemed quite clearly that it has been in their interest to fuel polarization, right? You have had recurring elections in Turkey, and by heightening tensions and exacerbating polarization, that has been quite beneficial, at least until the recent local elections. So I think there is clearly a top-down dimension to it. But with that, I think I'll pass the ball over to Emre for the other questions.
Maybe we can continue with Nora, and then we will pass the ball to Emre. Nora?
Sure, and I'll be brief as well, because I agree that especially the survey-based questions are the ones that Emre can best answer. Just to this last question, fascinating question on a democracy-autocracy cleavage, in addition to the other cleavages that we talked about. So my forthcoming book, which Ceylan was kind enough to mention, is actually based on the idea that the overarching driving cleavage in Turkey, within which you can nest all of these others that we've been talking about, is a cleavage between pluralist and anti-pluralist, between people in Turkey across political camps who believe that it's okay to share space and identity and neighborliness and governance with people who are not like them, and people who want to have a unitary sense of we and exclude those who are not like them. And so I think this has actually been an overarching theme throughout Turkish political history in different phases of polarization. The nature of, what you're pluralistic about will change, or what you adamantly, desire unity on will shift over the years according to the issues, according to the zeitgeist, according to the top-down, decisions of the policymakers and the leaders. But I think there is a basic cleavage in Turkey between, and this is true for people within each political camp. It's not between like seculars and conservatives. It's within the secular camp. There's more pluralist and anti-pluralist people. Within the conservative camp, there's more pluralist and anti-pluralist people. And this is, so I think that this is a really important point that lines up with the idea of a democracy-autocracy cleavage that may be emerging today in this post-truth environment. So yeah, shameless plug for my own work, when I will definitely be citing evidence from this survey to support.
Thank you, Nora. Emre, over to you.
Thank you. Yeah, first point here about the distinction between rural and urban. Unfortunately, we have a problem in the definition of rural and rurality in Turkey. In 2012, the government decided to change the definition of rural and declare 30 provinces, which composes about 75% of population, as urban. For example, Diyarbakir, all neighbors and villages of Diyarbakir, they have been accepted as urban, and they are not indeed. That's why we don't have a real information about the rurality of the issue. We are accepting all these points as neighborhoods, namely urban. That's why this is 95 versus 5% distinction is based on these official records, because we don't have any other data. Perhaps it is possible to make a kind of extrapolation by using the data of older years, but there are some changes in the neighborhoods and villages, etc. It's not easy to make this distinction. That's why, yeah, it could be better to make that kind of analysis based on the environment in which people are living, what kind of contact do they have or not. But for instance, it's not possible. Perhaps we can make a kind of data manipulation and we can try to understand, unfortunately. And Paul is right, there's a huge spatial segregation in Turkey between provinces, within districts, even within neighborhoods. We have a big spatial segregation. All aggregate election data shows it. It's possible to draw this conclusion. Turkey is highly polarized society in terms of spatial segregation. There are CHP supporters provinces, and there are some CHP supporter districts within the provinces, and there are etc. etc. It's possible, but it is not easy to show by using survey data. I would like to do it, but it is not easy to integrate two different data sets. And about low income issue, yeah, we have a problem of intersectionality, as postmodernists say. Yeah, because first of all, it is related with perceptions. This is not only deprivation or poverty matters, it's relative deprivation. also matters. We didn't discuss here, but if you can check the presentation we put in our website, you can see that different political party supporters, they have very, very different perceptions about the economy, about the position, about the future of the Turkish economy, etc. AK Party supporters, they are much more optimistic about the course of the economy. And of course, opposition is different. And it is related on perceptions. Yeah, it is not based on the realities we are living each. It is related with perceptions we are getting through the media. That's why media is very important. Media bubbles. Since we are living in media bubbles, we don't have access to information provided by other camp. That's why we believe that that's the only reality we have. And if we face with the reality of the other side, quote unquote, we don't like it. It becomes disgusting for us because it's unreal. Our reality is different. That's why we have different realities, and we don't have any idea about the reality of the other people, and it brings us to the lack of empathy, as Nora said. If you don't have any idea about the conditions in which other people are living, you cannot have empathy towards them. You cannot justify their behaviors. That's why media is very important. And it is related with Professor Sommer's excellent question. Yes, because of the media, I believe that change in the position of the political parties is not sufficient. Perhaps if we can observe some change in the rhetoric of political parties supported by their own media may affect the outcome. I'm not sure that people can easily understand the positions of political parties, and my other works was based on trying to classify political parties on the positions, how electorate they are classifying these political parties. So it didn't work. Really, we have very limited information about what these political parties say about politics. We have no idea. We have some clues. We have some heuristics, and the best heuristic is the leadership. Right? We are looking at the leader and we are supporting what he supports, and we are not supporting what he doesn't support. That's kind of heuristics matter. That's why I believe that we need to focus on this psychological and cognitive side of this issue.
Thank you very much, Emre. We will continue with some foreign policy aspects, but there is one question on EU and Germany, but this should be answered by Emre, I believe. Andre de Munter asks, the EU is conspicuously absent from the graph on the most important Germany is mentioned, and the EU is conspicuously absent from the graph on the most important partner of Turkey. Yeah. Could you elaborate a bit on this and how to see this in conjunction with the replies to the question on EU membership?
It's easy because it's an open-ended question. We ask people to give the name of a country or institution. I'm underlining. We also gave the option of telling the name of an institution, but percentage of EU sayers was very low. Perhaps we didn't have EU in the graph because EU is not in the scene, it seems. Yeah, it's something complicated. It's an open-ended question. It's not a closed-ended question. That's why they respondents, they didn't agree. They didn't tell something about EU. I don't know why. Perhaps it requires more elaboration, especially by conducting a kind of qualitative work. I have no idea, but they didn't say.
Andre works with Turkey in the European Parliament, so I guess he feels left out.
And Paul, actually, there's one question that I want to specifically ask you because you live in a country where there's a Turkish diaspora, and this is about the diaspora. The polarization also seemed to manifest itself in the diaspora. Could it be organized, or is it just influenced by Turkish media and the presence of mosques sponsored by the Turkish Directorate of Religious Affairs, Diyanet?
Yes, I mean, what we've seen is in recent years, precisely as the question sort of reveals, they know this, they're aware of this, that under the AKP, there's been a very much more deliberate effort to try to mobilize the diaspora politically. The Swedish diaspora is kind of interesting because it is divided in part among Kurds and Turks, sort of is equally. And the Kurdish diaspora in Sweden has been very successful in mobilizing itself politically and also making its sort of concerns heard in Swedish society, and have been very good at also mobilizing votes in Sweden and abroad. But the government, through various entities, the Diyanet, the mosques, what used to be called as the YTB, I think presidency for for diaspora relations or something like that, Turks abroad and their families, and other actors have been used to try to mobilize the diaspora. So, and that has also created polarization within the diaspora. And also, of course, as the question mentions, it creates, I think, an increasing alienation also among the diaspora. So it becomes a bit of an integration problem, because you have many Swedes of Turkish descent who tend to follow the kind of Havuz media, the pro-government media that Emre's report showed. And the picture that they present of Turkish affairs and Turkish politics is, I mean, worlds apart from the picture that they get in Swedish media. And I comment often on Turkish affairs in Swedish media, so I get these reactions sometimes that they don't understand what I'm talking about, that I'm being so unfair to the government and so on. And I think that just fuels and further exacerbates a sense of alienation among many Turks living in abroad. And finally, polarization has in Sweden traditionally not been a very serious problem. We've never had violence, for example, between different groups, but we did have that in 2015 and 2016 for the first time. Violent incidents, including some actual bombs and a near-fatal shooting between sort of Turks and pro-PKK Kurds that we haven't had before.
Thank you very much, Paul. And Nora, I will just turn to you because there are two questions about the US. First one, why do you think there is such cross-party consensus on mistrust of the US when there is significant polarization on so many other issues? And the next one is also, I'm curious about to hear your response. It's, sorry, where is that? Yeah. Would the views on USA change if this question was posed again in 2021 under a Biden administration?
Yeah, thank you. Those are two important questions, and kind of really boils down to the answer to both boils down to whether you take a more kind of structural approach to thinking about the reasons for the deep distrust in the United States that have been salient, not just under the Trump administration, but also under prior administrations, from the Obama administration's policies in Syria and vis-a-vis the Kurds, to prior to that the Bush administration's Greater Middle East Project and so forth. So there's kind of a structural dimension that is nonpartisan in the U.S. Of U.S. Sort of pivoting between sort of very heavy-handed engagement or selective engagement that is not necessarily great for Turkey's interest in the region, to also a lack of interest and kind of retrenchment from Turkey's region. So the U.S. has ruffled a lot of feathers, so it's understandable that there's considerable resentment. But then there's also this undermines a pillar of Turkey's national security and its role and its sort of posture in the region, and that as a NATO ally, as an EU candidate, although these are institutions with whom the relationship is obviously problematic, this is also a source of Turkey's soft and hard power in the region. And so it's a really a messy sort of structural situation. I think we're going to continue to see messiness despite the potential for a restart with the Biden administration, simply because the reason for ambivalence to the U.S. has to do with structural issues related to U.S. retrenchment, related to a lack of appetite in American public opinion for foreign engagements, which doesn't quite line up within the U.S. Sort of security needs as a great power. And all of this is also related to not an inverse relationship to Turkey's evolving relationship with Moscow, but there is this trend, and that was also evident in the study, right, of a fair amount of consensus. I think it was in the 10% range, that the relationship with Moscow is important. And so you have to read kind of the whole relationship, I think, with the US in these broader structural terms of sort of emerging great power rivalries as we move towards a more multipolar context, and yet Turkey cannot sort of thrive to the extent that might if it were to leave NATO or completely abandon relations with the EU. These are important relationships. So I think the message for the incoming Biden administration should be to to work as closely with Turkey as possible on those areas where agreement can be reached, to push Turkey a little bit more on issues that are of deep concern for the US and the EU, such as the human rights dossier. And to agree to disagree on certain issue areas, because at the end of the day, it's Turkey's neighborhood, and Turkey has to deal with the fallout of changing dynamics in the neighborhood as well. But it's going to be a source of ambivalence with us for a long time. It would help, obviously, if there was less polarizing rhetoric vis-a-vis the US coming from the leadership in the media.
Thank you so much. Actually, we are just coming to our end, but I will just direct two questions. One is for Paul, because this will be your recommendation, and it's not specific to German government, but it follows it. What would you recommend the German government and or political bodies of the EU to do in reaction towards polarization without further feeding it?
My goodness, what a difficult question. If I had that answer, look, I mean, there are. I mean, I saw among one of the participants here people who have been working on important sort of programs, getting different civil society actors involved from very different points of view, political spheres of the political spectrum, in trying to counter polarization and fostering sort of homogeneity. And that, I think, is one, support such initiatives. I think those are very important, and they're also still doable when many other things are difficult to do as a sort of, foreign aid actor in Turkey. And then, trying to find a way. I mean, Turkey has been kind of sending mixed signals. On the one hand, acting quite belligerently in the Eastern Mediterranean and many other sort of spheres, but also sending out feelers and suggestions that they are open to and want to have good relations and see a future within or with somehow the European Union. So while the EU has a need to support all of its member states, including Greece and Cyprus, and stand sort of firm against Turkish challenges, I think Germany is doing the right thing in also holding out possible openings for a positive agenda, as the EU terminology calls it, mainly offering up to potentially modernize the customs union and so on. So I think that's the right way to go.
Thank you. And one last foreign policy question, but this is directed to Emre. How do you explain MHP supporters to have less negative feelings on Libya intervention than AKP supporters, despite Libya is expected to be more of an AKP agenda issue?
Yes, it's a very good question. There is an 8 percentage point difference between two-party bases. It seems that, first of all, I can explain with another slide we didn't present here about the foreign policy preferences of different to these political parties. Our survey shows that MHP voters, they have more activist and interventionist policies about the international relations. It shows that they are preferring military intervention, they are preferring armed forces instead of negotiations, first of all. And the second possibility is that it is possible to explain this phenomenon with the fact that some of AK Party voters, they are not very informed about the topic. and they can prefer I have neutral feelings instead of telling a specific positive feeling, because they may feel themselves uninformed about the topic. And because of the differences between the bases of these two political parties, our data shows that an average MHP voter is more educated than an AK Party voter, for example. It's possible to explain by these two factors. The first one, demographic difference. The second one, differences in the foreign policy preferences. It is possible. We need to check for it. Yeah.
May I just throw in a quick hypothesis off the cuff here? Also, it could also be that the Libyan intervention was served an important function in terms of the battle against Greece in the Eastern Mediterranean, right? In trying to secure territorial waters and an exclusive economic zone that challenged Greek claims. So maybe that's something that also works with the MHP supporters.
Thank you for the final comments, Paul. And I think it's time for us to conclude. Sorry that we cannot extend our time. I enjoyed especially company of whom I am confident to call as friends. And I also want to thank you personally, Emre, Nora, Paul, for your invaluable comments. And I also would like to thank to my colleagues, Özgür and Alberto, for their behind the curtain support. And also to my project team members, Pınar, Tuğçe, Gizem, Büşra, thank you for your hard work. And of course, to our audience, I'm sorry if we missed out some of the questions because of the time constraints. We really enjoyed the comments and questions. And if for some reason you missed the part of this conversation, it will be posted on the GMS YouTube channel. So you can follow the conversations from there. And with that, I close it, and I wish you all the best for the new year. And please stay healthy. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.